Hey, welcome to the deep dive. Welcome to your favorite YouTube channel discussing Texas sports, college sports, and whatever the heck Ian and I are concerned with at the moment, including the War of 1812. You never know. Ian, how the hell are you, buddy?
I'm good. You took forever to get on. You said your internet was down or something, so now my Topo Chico is empty.
I have a near full one, and I see your Topo Chico and I raise it because I've got a whole fridge full of them. So you're not going to be able to lord that over me during this YouTube show. Hey, speaking of this YouTube show, we would love for you to subscribe. Please comment below. Please like us and make sure that you help us in that glorious algorithm that none of us understand. And also make sure you're going to Inside Texas and getting the best darn football discussion, sports discussion, and everything else you could imagine. It's a great place to be, and it's where the best conversation is happening about Texas sports. Hey, we want to have a conversation today about models, Ian. Not my preferred conversation of models, which is power ranking Christy Brinkley, Claudia Schiffer, and Elle McPherson. We're going to talk about college football
You just
ranking
aged
models.
yourself so hard.
I did age myself, yes. Very Gen X. Who are the young models right now? I don't know.
I don't know.
They all seem like to be 93-pound waifs, so I'm not sure. I'll just find out who Leo DiCaprio's dating, and then I'll know the top models at the moment.
Or Belichick.
Or Belichick. What is that, runner-up for Miss Maine? I don't know.
Third, I think.
Oh, okay. Not bad. Not bad. It is Maine, though, so we got to make that. We got to adjust that math. All right. Before we alienate all of our Maine listeners, MAINE listeners, let's talk about this. So, as you guys all know, power rankings have come to the fore in college football. I think that's a good thing, ultimately. The AP rankings and media people voting on popularity contests and logos has never really worked for me. So what people have tried to do is create a schema with which they can adequately rank teams based on their quality, their schedule, and all that. And ESPN has endeavored to do just that with their FPI. Interestingly, Ian, they're releasing this FPI preseason, which, if you're familiar with most power rankings, they tend to get more and more credibility as an actual season is played and there's an interplay of data and numbers, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out that you can pretty decently pre-rank teams in power rankings. And the key to this is that these components are made up of prior seasons, returning starters, returning production, past performance, recruiting rankings, coaching tenure, interesting, and these things are sticky. So you would think that in these power ranking models, whether it's endorsed by ESPN or Vegas has their own proprietary models, just like ESPN, you would think the recruiting rankings would fall out as the season progresses and you get actual data. They still have that component even through the end of the year, because when they've back tested their models, they've realized that it has some salience. I always thought that was very interesting and sort of counterintuitive, but as I thought about it, it kind of made sense.
It's really obvious if you think about it, because like Boise State enters the year and you're like, I think they're maybe the 40th best team based on recruiting rankings. And then they trample the Mountain West. And then your brain, goes like 13-0.
You go, yeah, this is a top 20 team.
Top 20 team. I bet they would smash Alabama. And
yeah.
Some of those Boise State teams, maybe. But, the recruiting rankings keep you oriented in something beyond unbalanced conference scheduling.
It's good. Yeah, and we do have to say that the key to ESPN is that this is, as with all of these rankings, the goal is to make it mechanistic. So you're not going in after you do the data and say, well, I'm kind of a Clemson guy this year. I'm going to jack them up 7 spots. That doesn't happen. This is purely mechanistic, and the model interplays with the season, and that's how teams rise and fall, right? I might actually endorse that it's good to do a mechanistic model because I do think that these power rankings are useful. But then I like to do a Passover, which is a little more art than science, and say, this is the model of a team that I know historically and based on my football knowingness, this is an underachiever potentially. Or this team, well outside of the top 25 at number 44, this has all the makings of an overachiever based on what I know about development cycles, stuff like that. Or they've got talent at quarterback, receiver, and edge, whatever, things that I value more than other positions. Ian, do you think there's some value in that? Or do you think that our mind lies to us and is subject to biases and it's best to stick straight mechanics?
Well, these models are just they're just applying normal human wisdom and metrics about what makes for good college football teams, and then just storing and quantifying it in a way that is hard for us to do. So they're really just a reflection of, I was arguing with, not exactly arguing with Connor about this before the show, and we were waiting for your internet to work, about how it's like, if you had the capacity to study all these teams and do like your own Phil Steele, that's almost what these models are. But except for the way they do like regressions to see which factors lead to more sustained consistency in projections, right? Those are a lot harder to do for our brains than for a spreadsheet or whatever.
Also, unlike Phil Steele, less exclamation points at the end of every sentence. And no mention of VHTs, very high talents. That's one of his trademark phrases.
Well, also what we were joking about before the show, VHTs are obviously weighted very powerfully in the formula.
Yes.
But they don't tell you that much about him because obviously they're cribbing from each other, these service rankings. And they don't want to broadcast. I'm sure like ESPN doesn't want to broadcast how much their model depends on the work of On3 and 24/7 to rank all these players for them.
Yeah, we know they're probably not using their own model in-house solely.
Yeah. And you have now with the transfer portal, you have to use the On3 rankings for transfer players. I remember Bill tried to do it with transfers with like just based off returning production. It did not work.
No.
He tried to weight it for the level of program you were at. It did not work. And now it's just transfer portal ranking that the On3 does whenever a guy enters the portal.
Yeah. The interesting thing is we know the components that they put in the model. We don't know the weighting of the components, which is just as important. But it's pretty clearly, if you look at this, that recruiting, portal, and past performance are the most heavily weighted. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're heavily weighted like 18% to 15%. I think that those three components might be 75% of the model.
That's why Texas is number one in the FPI this year.
That's why Texas is number one. So, Connor, would this be a good opportunity to bring up what those rankings are?
This is why I was early on Texas before the models. And now I may have to fade Texas.
Well, so here's the thing. When you don't see a clear dominant team, it's very like I can justify 5 or 6 different teams at number one, and I'll be dissatisfied with all 5 or 6, including Texas. However, I look a little further, and then you start to go, oh, that's it. I don't know about that. So interestingly, the model, 13 of the top 25 are SEC teams. The next best is the Big Ten at 5. So yikes. 11 of the top 18 are SEC teams. I don't think that's true, but I don't think it's far off. And the reason I don't think it's true is that burst we run into down starting at number 12 with LSU. LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, OU, Florida in succession, right? Yeah, Connor says because ESPN owns the SEC, they're playing with the model. They're not. Again, they're doing it based on their mechanistic stuff. I don't think that those teams that I listed are all going to hit. I think a couple of them are going to be a disaster, and I think a couple might even make the playoffs, right? We don't know who they are, but I don't think the SEC at the end of the year will be 11 of the best 18. If they are, this is a good reason for the SEC to push that 5+11 playoff model, because they're going to have 8 teams in the playoffs at the end of the season, and everyone else is going to be screaming their hair out, screaming and pulling their hair out.
Well, as you know, the actual rankings will have the lost column bias weighed in much more heavily than the end of the year power rankings could say the same thing as this. But as we know from the fact that a lot of these teams play each other, the win-loss records will make that prohibitive.
They'll all swap losses, and then people will say, well, they lost, so I can't put them high in the power ranking. Whereas a team like Michigan, which on the down low has a pretty forgiving schedule.
Yeah.
And so if you actually look at the ESPN FPI ratings, they have a very useful metric that I would point all of you to look at, which is likelihood to 6 wins.
Oh.
So look at that column out here. 6 wins percentage. It's right before projections, that column. I'm pointing to it on my screen like that's going to help. But it's right under projections, the first thing under right before you get to projections, 6 wins percentage. So what they're saying is, what's the likelihood of this team getting to 6 wins? If you go down, Florida's likelihood is in the high 60s of getting to 6 wins. And they're ranked in the top 20 in power rankings. Michigan is at 94%. And they're ranked 1 above Florida. Now, I'll tell you, on a neutral field right now, I'll take Florida over Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
However,
that's stealing money.
Michigan's going to play Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, Washington, all of these Big Ten lower tier teams that just aren't threatening. And those games all happen in November. So wait for the Michigan is making a big run articles that are coming out in November, while Florida is, playing Georgia, Texas, freaking LSU every week. So anyway, that's a very interesting thing to look at, because it gives you some idea of the true strength of schedule, in a sense, of how they're perceiving it. What's your likelihood of getting to 6 wins? And it really separates some of these teams. Arkansas is another one. Yeah, look at OU, of course. Arkansas, if you go further down, they have them ranked 22nd in these power rankings. I vehemently disagree with that. And they say their likelihood to 6 wins is 63.5%.
Yeah.
I think that's more like 42%. So guess who's betting against the Arkansas Razorbacks this year until this adjusts? And that has to do, let's talk a little bit in a moment about the art of projection versus the attempted science of projection. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Before we do that, I want to talk about a guy who's mastered the art and science of mortgages. His name is Gabe Winslow. You can reach him at 832-557-1095. Why? 20 years in the industry, over 20 years in the industry. He's been on every side of this industry. Used to own a title company, not just a mortgage guy. And he's very slick. He's very sharp. And I mean slick in a good way, on your behalf. Former National Merit Scholar. He's got a law degree from a top 25 law school. Just a guy who's done a lot of different stuff and settled into this because he loves it. Frankly, I think he sees he has an advantage over everybody else in this industry. And then also because he really enjoys helping people deal make and get in their dream home at the best possible deal. Give Gabe a call. Find out why he's the best at what he does. And tell him that Contrarian sent you. And he'll give you an extra special discount. 832-557-1095. Or go to his website, mortgagesbygabe.com. All right. We talked about the art and the science of this. Esteemed producer, if you don't mind, can you pull back up the FPI top 25?
You know what drives me nuts about this is that I had to defend Alabama over losing to Oklahoma. Because all these people were like, if Alabama was so good, they shouldn't have lost to Oklahoma. And it's
Right.
like, okay, I've been disparaging Oklahoma all year, but they did have like a top 10 or 20 defense, FBI defense.
Yeah.
They're coming off a bye week. They're playing at home. Like, that's not an easy game.
No.
So, and one person was like, Oklahoma was like a mid-tier Big 12 team.
No.
Like, I don't know about maybe. Their offense was really bad.
Well, actually, interestingly, because the Big 12 has a bunch of teams that are 6-3 and 5-4.
Yeah.
That actually may be accurate in the sense that the team that's second is tied for the team that's in seventh, right? Like in record.
If Alabama played a Big 12 schedule, they could absolutely have lost 1 or 2 games against that type of team.
For sure.
So it's just ridiculous.
Well, that is the importance of using a totality of a season, which is Alabama's problem wasn't that they got upset by OU. It's that they got upset by OU and Vanderbilt. And those sort of 2 losses were viewed as unconscionable. Although, if you look at Vandy from a power ranking standpoint, quite good. And actually, they went into the bowl game, played Georgia Tech, and sort of blew their doors off when both teams were kind of at near full strength. So kind of interesting. But any one game is not necessarily determinative. And that's why you want as big and robust a data set as possible, right?
Or a playoff.
That's the other part that's interesting is I'm often, it's very interesting to go through these and say, well, that team doesn't belong. That team doesn't belong. That team doesn't belong. Sometimes what's harder is going down and saying this team does belong. And that's where the art of this goes. If you go down, Connor, and you're going to have to scroll down quite a bit to number 44, that is the Illinois Fighting Illini. So, Ian, can I interest you in a football team that's at the top of their development cycle? There are a bunch of just 6-year seniors everywhere. They're returning their secondary. They're returning a good wide receiver, probably the most underrated quarterback in college football, Luke Altmaier, if you've ever watched him play. And they're returning a lot of their offensive line, including their all Big Ten left tackle. Is this team of interest to you? Ranked 44th in the power rankings behind UCF, Wisconsin, and a number of other teams that may, Kentucky. Interesting, right? I'm predicting based on the art of this. I understand that Illinois' recruiting rankings aren't great. I understand historically their record is up and down. This looks like, from my time spent evaluating the Big 12, Ian, a prime candidate for overachievement based on the metrics that FPI uses. What do you think?
I'll add a schematic wrinkle to this. They have a defensive style that is overwhelming until you get to a certain point, a certain level of opponent, and then you get rapidly diminishing returns. They play like a 46 defense as their base. And so they have 5 guys up on the line of scrimmage. Even if you're in a spread, they have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage in the box. And they are applying pressure on everything you do.
It's a good way to whip average teams.
Yes.
And the point is, in the Big Ten, they're going to play a bunch of average teams. And if Ohio State smokes them, which they probably will, that still just counts as 1 loss, right?
Yes. Indiana rode that to the playoffs last year.
The other thing about Illinois that's interesting, and I'm not going to go their full contrarian in honor of you, Ian, but they will run the ball. And they have a sort of physical identity. And increasingly in college football, as funny as that sounds, that's like kind of a contrarian approach. Now, they're not regressive. They're not throwing it just 12 times a game or something. But if they can run on you, they will run on you. They're kind of like Florida in that regard. And so that's another factor that I like in contrarian sort of overachieving teams. Do you do something weird and a little different and off-putting that your weekly opponents can't really prepare for from having played someone else, right?
Yeah.
So I like them as a team that's going to potentially overachieve. Arkansas, I've already said, is going to underachieve their ranking. Can I point to another overachiever and see what you think?
Please do.
Go way up, Connor, to number 11. The Clemson Tigers.
This is – we own this island, Paul.
That's right. I would put them in my top 5. Why? Well, Space Force Ian loves dominant wide receivers. He loves a veteran, smart quarterback who makes good decisions and throws accurate balls.
Especially if he's a dual threat.
And Klubnik, in fairness, uses his dual threatery to extend a play and throw the ball more often than not. But he'll take off and run, and he's capable.
Yeah.
They also had an underachieving defense because we knew that their defensive coordinator wasn't doing a good job, got fired, and they replaced him with like the perfect defensive coordinator for a team that was underachieving schematically. Tom Allen, who is like meat and potatoes. We're going to line up where everyone's going to know what they're doing, and we're going to be sound. And against these basic concepts, we are going to be a sound defense. That's what Clemson needs. Does this sound like a team you might be interested in and should not be outside of your top 10?
Paul, I would make Clemson a better favorite than Texas.
Interesting.
If I were doing this, I would have Clemson is more likely to win the national championship than Texas.
Okay, well, let me stop you. This is a power ranking. We're not talking about the ease of their schedule or anything like that.
Okay, I would, even in power ranking, I might go higher. I think Texas's roster is deeper and stronger top to bottom.
Yes.
I still think that matters necessarily.
It matters when we play them and what just sort of things befall them or us, right?
Yeah.
I will say, to me, to me, everything that is an indicator of college football success largely lines up for Clemson. Even their offensive line, which I think is the weakness of their team from a talent perspective, it's like a bunch of 6-year seniors. And we know from experience, Ian, that those guys, week to week, unless they encounter a Texas, which would be interesting, they're going to hold up just fine based on seniority, experience, and all being 24 years old.
They did hold up, maybe not just fine, but decently against Texas.
Well, I think this year's Texas will be a better pass rush than last year's Texas. And last year's Texas had a pretty good pass rush.
Yes, true.
So very interesting team to note there. The other teams up there, they're all the old familiar faces, right? Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Notre Dame. If Notre Dame gets quarterback play, there's a very good argument that they could be your number one team on this power ranking because
not going to happen.
I think Marcus Freeman has – look, when they played A&M, I was like, oh, like there's a different kind of athlete running around in South Bend that we have not seen there in – I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say 30 years. Like it's a different type of dude. And
their quarterback position, though, to go back to your earlier point, is not on the right development cycle.
Well, the superpower of Riley Leonard was that all third and fourth and shorts are automatically converted.
Yep.
And in college football, I cannot name a more useful asset that the statistics don't adequately capture, right?
Yeah,
because his 4-yard run, Ian, is captured as a 4-yard run on his average.
Well, if you have
he converted 3rd and 3 on the opponent 21-yard line, right? That's the difference.
EPA should account for that.
It does, and so some of the advanced statistics do, and the advanced statistics love Notre Dame, which is unsurprisingly also they got a nice playoff draw, but it's why they played for the national title, right?
But they don't have Riley Leonard this year.
They don't. And so the question is, can they improve at all the other positions enough incrementally to offset that? We don't know.
I think 2026 is when I would anticipate seeing more of that.
I think that's fair. So are there any other teams here overrated or underrated from this perspective that when you do your pass-through of the art of football knowingness rather than just the pure mechanics of this, is there a team that jumps out and you go, I'm not sold, or this is a team to keep your eye out?
Let's see here. A&M 6-win percentage, 92. That's really high. My study of Marcel Reed in A&M spring game, I am not seeing a major leap as a decision maker.
So this is why you need to join Inside Texas, folks. If you're just a YouTube listener or watcher, Ian wrote a really good article breaking down why A&M has a lot of things to like about this team.
Yeah.
But he was like, hey, let me show you this stuff from Marcel Reed of him holding and patting a ball that should have been thrown a second and a half ago, like extending a play that's actually a quick read, and his immediate underneath read was there for 11 yards, but he decides to extend for no reason.
And
Let me offer a counter.
Also staring at his wristband.
Yes.
Every single play.
Like what's the coach call? Let me offer a counterpoint.
Go ahead.
This is college football. And although some of that decision-making may burn him against the Texas Longhorns type level defense in Austin with a crowd behind us and stuff like that too, he's also a really good athlete. And college football allows a slippery dude who doesn't totally know what's going on to run for 11 yards anyway. It happens in a way that it won't happen in the NFL, right? So Vince Young, before the light turned on, was a really effective college quarterback that would only be unmasked in a sense in 2004 by a team running a really novel scheme like a Texas Tech, or a really loaded team that also ran a good scheme like OU. And also all of our coaches squatted to pee in that game, right? But every other game, his decision-making may not have been optimal, but he still ran for 171 yards and threw for 220 because he's Vince Young. And then in 2005, it all came together where he really gets what's going on, and also he's awesome. And so he just explodes. So I'm not comparing Marcel Reed to Vince Young. Sorry, Texas fans. I'm not making that comparison. But what I am saying is the college game is more forgiving to a really athletic quarterback.
Yeah. They play in the SEC, though, so there's going to be a lot of teams that are well-schemed and loaded with talent.
So I think it's going to be game plan. I think that A&M, you're going to see some teams be like, well, we got A&M, let's run our stuff, right? I think you're going to see some SEC teams, particularly after a bye, particularly if they have a sorry team before they play A&M. They're going to come up with some specialized game plans that may be trying to exploit exactly what Ian was talking about. And they may show some weird zone looks that Reed has not seen on film, or they haven't shown on film. And the goal is like get him to hold the ball and be indecisive.
Zone blitzing, too. Sometimes you can really wreck a quarterback like that with zone blitzing.
Yeah.
There's another few teams.
How about one that's not elevated that you think could be underrated?
Underrated?
Yeah.
I was going to pick another overrated.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think that Ohio State is a lock to be a good team, but I think their ceiling is potentially capped by getting decimated at defensive tackle, losing Jim Knowles. I think Jordan Hudson put in an email that got Patricia that job. And then
shut up.
And then they have a young quarterback
who
may have trouble in big games with decision making when everybody's targeting him.
The interplay between Patricia, who's known as being pretty stubborn and likes to game plan week to week, and the Ohio State guys who are like I call them the Ohio State deep state. It's like Larry Johnson, their linebacker coach, Laurinaitis, who was an awesome linebacker in college. But those guys like to just roll out the ball and play ball, like play defense. Like that's their approach. And they really squabbled with Jim Knowles and in no small part played a role in him leaving Ohio State. Even though Knowles was vindicated, he left Ohio State after winning the national championship, but doing it his way, and went to a rival in the Big Ten. And I don't think that's a coincidence. So I'm very curious about that interplay between Patricia, who really is the Belichick school of liking to game plan each opponent individually week to week. And to his credit, Steve Belichick, who's now the DC at North Carolina, he did an excellent job at Washington with very poor talent. basically just scheming week to week and kind of taking away an opponent's strength and having a pretty bad Washington defense hang in there against outmatched teams. So very curious about that interplay. Anyone else?
Mr. Producer, can you scroll down? Or actually, this is fine. I mean, me and you, I'm with you in liking Auburn, but it looks like FPI shares our enthusiasm.
Yeah, I was going to say they've got Auburn. They've factored in all that stuff. There's no like they're underrated. That's bold, really.
And I don't know if I would elevate any of these other teams necessarily.
What about Nebraska? You know they're going to win tight games in the fourth quarter, don't you? Is this the rule of three at work here?
Nebraska is probably going to be a solid team that loses a couple games that keep them away from the big time.
Oh, what about Texas Tech? They spent a bunch of money in the offseason, Ian.
And what is that? What place are they then in this ranking? They look like they must be very low.
They look like they're in the 30s. Yeah, 35. Below Baylor. Below Kentucky.
I think that's too low. I do.
Okay.
They got some Space Force weapons in the portal. Their quarterback is pretty solid, and he was good last year. They hired Texas State's offensive coordinator, and they got the Houston defensive coordinator. I feel a little better about those hires.
Houston DC did a good job last year with what he had.
They got one of the linchpin pieces of the Houston defense too.
I find the inclusion of the Tulane Green Wave wrong.
Yeah, because their quarterback was bought by Duke.
Mensa went to Duke. Mensa should have played for Herman. God, the fates should have made that happen. But yeah, Mensa is at Duke.
They are a little bit of they're like a wide zone team, and they even get under center. So there's a chance that Mensa was pretty inflated by the system.
They also lost their best running back in the portal.
Same deal though, potentially.
Maybe.
It's still high though.
Yeah, if anyone knows what to do with North Carolina, I'm all ears.
Michigan State.
You think it should be higher?
This is year 2 for that new staff that was really good at Oregon State. There's probably some serious learning curve issues in translating their scheme to Michigan State. The model will be dinging Michigan State for the other coach who got himself trapped and fired.
Yeah, Mel Tucker.
And then the year 1 with the new staff. And they still have some collective money, I think. So knowing next to nothing about the Michigan State inputs, I would still say that is a team that could be wildly undervalued here.
All right, my eyes went to the exact same thing on this part of the slide that Connors did, which is Oklahoma State. The greatest coach in Oklahoma State football history is a non-factor. They're saying Oklahoma State's roughly on par with Stanford and UTSA. Stanford's going to be awful, Ian. Oklahoma State football is just done?
Yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe.
Maybe so. Could he be fired?
He will definitely be fired if they win 5 or 6 games.
Yeah.
They tried. There's some regent there that tried really hard to push him out and came just short of doing so. So another losing season. There's no way Gundy can hold him up.
All right. Well,
Liberty. Look at Liberty.
The shine came off of Liberty a little bit last year.
Well, they got a bunch of players poached in the portal.
Well, Caden Salter, their quarterback, may be the starting quarterback for Colorado if he wins that job.
Yeah, but they poached a guy from Coastal Carolina to replace him.
Interesting.
That one stands out to me as
Yeah, that range of 3.9 to 8.7 wins, that's basically you're throwing up your hands and saying, I don't know. That's statistically, there's not a lot of value in saying they will win between 4 and 9 games.
This is where a real bettor would make their money. It's digging into these obscure teams for which there's very little.
It's where I make my money. It's why I recommend games like Western Kentucky, Sam Houston State.
Because Vegas has little incentive to nail those lines, right?
Oh, no, they have a lot of incentive to nail every line, but they're not going to spend as much time on that as they are going to spend on Ohio State, Michigan, or Texas OU.
Right.
So, that is where and also where information can be valuable. And, just little random things like, if you knew of a Texas high school quarterback that was really dynamic, he got lost in the depth chart at Baylor and he transfers to Arkansas Pine Bluff. You just make a mental note of that. Like, hey, this guy's a great dual threat and he's going to be starting for them. He's actually going to elevate them.
Maverick McIver at where to go, Western Kentucky?
Maverick McIver at Western Kentucky.
Exactly what you're describing.
We should beat UTEP is Connor's bold prediction, given that they're ranked in the 130 or so. Yeah. Yeah, our preseason challenge really is about Ohio State. I don't think we're going to be challenged or pushed by anybody else.
I don't know about you, but the level of attention I'm giving to non-premier, non-conference games now that Texas is back is grievously reduced.
I still give great attention to every opponent, Ian, because I'm not an arrogant T-sip. But also because I write a football preview every year where I break down every opponent. Also, my goal is to try to find an individual player or an individual position group that might actually be good. And so I could learn something about Texas. Or they run a certain offensive system. And so I say, well, this will actually be a good JV level scout for preparing us for OU 5 weeks later, right? So that's what I look for.
Also, because like Ohio State is going to be a great test, but they're also going to be seriously game planned. Whereas if UTEP has a really good corner or end or something, they may or may not, the coaches may or may not actually game plan them that carefully. And then you see what the player does, the Texas counterpart does, like on their own devices.
That's right. Yeah, no, that could be very useful. I remember very distinctly when Khalil Mack was at Buffalo.
Yeah.
They played, I think, Ohio State in an early non-con. Ohio State blew him out, but like Khalil Mack went crazy, and then everyone was like, "Oh, who's this guy?" And so there are individually good players or good units at the lower levels. You just have to find it, identify it, and then that's the unit I watch the whole game when they play Texas, just to see, is there some measuring stick here? Like, is there some value? I was talking to Connor about, I remember researching UTEP long ago, and I was watching some of their film, and I was like, man, this Aaron Jones guy is really good. This running back. Is it just because they're playing is it because they're playing UTSA, or he seems really good? And then he played UT. We blew them out, but he had like a 70-yard touchdown on us. And of course, he goes on to the NFL, and he's a really good player. So you can find and identify stuff like that. But you're right. With Texas being back, there's not a lot of peril in some of these non-cons where you're kind of sweating. Like, if we play poorly, this could go really bad.
It's also harder to find those Aaron Jones in the preseason. Because if you could find him in the preseason, somebody else probably pushed him.
He'll be starting at Michigan.
Yeah.
So Aaron Jones would not have finished his career at UTEP.
No.
In modern football, he would have finished his career at Texas, A&M, or LSU or something, and would have been all conference. So anyway, that is our rollicking and exploratory discussion about some of this stuff. Honestly, it's just a platform to talk football, talk ball. It's the preseason. And let us know in the comments. What do you think? Is there real value in doing some of these power polls? I mean, to me, They're much more valuable than the AP poll or the coaches poll or the SID poll is what it really is. But what is the value of it? And is there value, if you know ball, of like looking over it and sort of going against it in contrarian ways at certain points? Ian, any parting thoughts?
I'm going to go look into Michigan State.
All right.
Now
Ian's going to go do a deep dive on Aiden Childs.
Playoffs, but yeah, I bet they're a lot better than that.
Well, they got a good coach and they got a quarterback, so we'll see.
Yeah.
For Ian Boyd, I'm Paul Wadlington saying thanks.